Imagine a world where holding a door open for someone is considered this violent act of physical dominance, like a silent implication that the other person is just too weak to operate heavy iron.
Right.
But in that exact same world, if you let the door slam in their face, you are guilty of systemically excluding them from spaces of power.
Exactly. You're trapped.
Right. Either way, no matter what you choose, you are biologically condemned. So, welcome to the deep dive. If you want to understand the invisible psychological machinery operating beneath the surface of today's culture, you are in the exact right place.
You really are.
But before we unpack this incredibly dense terrain, please take a second to like and subscribe to the show. It is absolutely the best way to help us continue bringing you these, intensive, comprehensive explorations of the ideas shaping our modern world.
Yeah, and let me tell you, you are going to want to be securely strapped in for this one.
That is probably the understatement of the year, right?
Oh, for sure, because the source material we're examining today is unapologetic, it's highly controversial, and just intellectually relentless.
Yeah.
It requires us to look really closely at the underpinnings of some of the most heated debates in our society today.
So today's deep dive is a comprehensive review of a newly published ebook, and it's titled Woke Catechism, Creed for the Cult of Grievance by Connie Riker.
Such an intense title.
It really is. And our mission over the next hour or so is to completely dissect the sociological, legal, and psychological frameworks presented in this book. We're going to look under the hood of what the author describes as the modern cultural landscape.
And we really need to set some ground rules here.
Yes, absolutely. Because this book touches on the absolute most radioactive flashpoints of both the left and the right, we are putting our hard hats on today.
Seriously.
I want to emphasize to you, our listener, right up front, that neither of us here is taking a political side.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, nor are we endorsing the ideologies that are being, ruthlessly critiqued in the text.
Right. Our job isn't to tell you who is right or who is wrong here.
Exactly. We are acting strictly as your impartial tour guides through this incredibly dense, volatile ideological machinery.
And to navigate this properly, you really have to understand the highly unusual structure of the book itself. Because Connie Riker didn't write a traditional political essay.
No, not at all.
Right, or like a dry sociological textbook. She describes this as a work of edutainment, constructed as a really sharp, unblinking satire.
Which is such a unique approach for this kind of topic.
It is. To expose what she sees as this ongoing systemic war on masculinity and Western civilization, the entire book is written from a first-person perspective.
Right.
But she deliberately adopts the persona of a radical female supremacist.
Yeah, reading it literally feels like stumbling upon the private diary of an ideological supervillain.
That's the perfect way to describe it.
I mean, the author creates this character who is entirely possessed by this negative animus. She is allied with what the text calls cultural Marxists, and her explicit stated goal throughout the whole book is to relentlessly attack masculinity.
And the author is using this extreme, unapologetic voice as a rhetorical mirror. She wants to reflect the underlying logic of modern gender dynamics by just, stripping away all the polite academic obfuscation.
Right, just saying the quiet part out loud.
Exactly, but through a megaphone. By adopting the voice of the extreme, Riker attempts to show the reader the logical conclusion of certain popular cultural premises.
And this is where it gets really interesting for you listening. Because honestly, by the end of this deep dive, I guarantee you will absolutely want to head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy this ebook just to see this startling rhetorical mirror for yourself.
Oh, you have to read it to believe it. It is a wild, often very uncomfortable ride.
Very. And the book wastes absolutely no time easing the reader in. I mean, chapter 1 immediately establishes the core premise of this radical persona.
Which is the idea that masculinity is not a biological reality to be managed or integrated, but rather it is a toxic pollutant.
A pollutant.
Yeah, it's treated literally as a pre-crime.
Which is wild. So the author titles this opening section, The Original Sin of Testosterone. And the persona starts by analyzing something that is just incredibly mundane, which is digital warfare and modern dating.
Right. She points to this specific statistic, noting that 78% of heterosexual women report feeling utterly exhausted by dating apps like Bumble or Hinge.
Which, a lot of people probably agree with. Dating apps are exhausting.
Sure. But notice how the satirical persona frames this exhaustion. She doesn't blame the technology or the gamification of romance or the algorithms. She zeroes in on a completely banal interaction. A man sends a message saying, "How is your week going?"
Right, just a basic, hey, how are you? Most people would view that as standard, harmless small talk. Like maybe a little unimaginative, but certainly not malicious.
But the persona calls this emotional terrorism.
Wow, emotional terrorism.
Yeah, the author takes that exact feeling of dating app exhaustion and weaponizes it through the persona. The text describes the modern male seeking companionship as a psychological sleeper cell.
A sleeper cell. Over a text that says, how is your week going?
Exactly. That opening line isn't seen as an attempt at connection. It is framed as a weapon of mass exhaustion. The persona argues that by asking how she is doing, the man is forcing the woman to carry the cognitive burden of the conversation.
Right, so he is extracting her psychic energy to feed his, what does she call it? His hollow patriarchal narcissism.
Yes, the phrase used in the text is a microscopic violation of your holistic frequencies.
It's just incredible how the author uses this extreme academic therapeutic language to criminalize the most basic human interaction.
It really is. And if you're listening to this and thinking it sounds completely detached from reality, just think about the last time you saw a viral dispute on social media.
Oh, like where someone claimed that a friend asking them for a favor was an act of unpaid emotional labor?
Yes, exactly. Or a violation of boundaries. Riker is taking that real-world therapeutic language and just pushing it to its absolute satirical limit.
And that criminalization isn't just applied to adult men on dating apps, which is where things get really intense.
Right, she goes much further.
The author takes this logic to its absolute extreme by applying it to infancy, like literal babies.
The text argues that to truly eradicate the pathogen of masculinity, society must reject the bourgeois patriarchal concept of childhood innocence.
That part of the book was genuinely chilling to me. The assertion that a male infant is not just a baby, but an unrepentant oppressor in waiting.
Yeah, the persona calls a baby boy the larval stage of the parasitical patriarchal force.
Larval stage? Jeez.
And the psychological conditioning that the book highlights here is fascinating. The persona demands that a baby boy be viewed not with maternal affection, but with the vigilant suspicion of a prison warden monitoring a dangerous inmate.
Wow.
Right. His first cries are framed not as a biological need for food or comfort, but as a tyrannical demand for the subjugation of the mother.
Okay, wait, hold on. Even in the context of extreme satire, how does the author bridge the gap between a helpless infant crying for milk and a tyrant demanding subjugation?
It's a huge leap.
Doesn't that risk losing the reader completely because it's just so absurd?
Well, the author bridges that gap by demonstrating how ideology can overwrite basic maternal instinct.
Okay, how so?
The persona argues that the infant's cry is the first assertion of male privilege. It's this expectation that female labor, in this case, the mother's body, exists solely to serve his needs.
Wow, so it's a theological framework stripped of God and replaced entirely with identity politics.
Exactly.
So it is essentially a secular version of original sin.
Yeah.
The book is arguing that society now treats the Y chromosome itself as a biological warrant for arrest.
Right. The sin isn't something you do, it's something you are born with.
Which is terrifying.
And the author even argues that natural boyish kinetic energy, every toy truck a toddler grabs, every playful shove on the playground must be viewed as a prelude to vehicular manslaughter or global thermonuclear war.
Seriously, a toy truck.
Yes. The persona states that this natural competitive spirit must be pathologized as a behavioral disorder.
So the pathologization of basic biology. The book suggests that this is why we see such high rates of boys being chemically drugged into submission using medications like Adderall and Ritalin.
Right. The persona literally says the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, should classify maleness itself as a severe, contagious mental disorder.
It's just wild. And to sustain a worldview where an infant is an oppressor, you have to engage in a complete rewriting of history, which is the next major theme Riker explores.
You really do. Because if masculinity is a biological defect, then everything built by men throughout human history must inherently be oppressive.
Right.
So the author's persona looks back at the Paleolithic era and the invention of the Acheulean hand axe.
Now, mainstream archaeology views the stone hand axe as a crucial survival tool, right?
Yeah.
Something that helped early humans thrive, hunt, build.
Exactly. But the persona in the book rejects this entirely. She frames the hand axe as the inaugural weapon of the patriarchy.
Wow.
She claims that the act of striking stone to stone was an act of aggressive rebellion against a peaceful, natural matriarchy. The text says early man introduced the demonic concept of sharpness into a previously smooth, yielding world.
The demonic concept of sharpness, the vocabulary she uses is just so vivid.
It really paints a picture.
It turns a piece of flint into an ideological original sin. And she carried that exact same logic all the way from the Stone Age up to the 20th century, specifically targeting the atomic bomb.
Right, the 1945 Trinity nuclear test is analyzed through this radical psychosexual lens. The persona doesn't just see it as a weapon of war or some massive scientific milestone.
Right, she takes it somewhere else entirely.
She claims J. Robert Oppenheimer and his team of scientists were acting out of severe womb envy.
Womb envy. Okay, how does the author's persona logically string together nuclear physics and maternal creative power?
Well, the author argues that because men cannot create life biologically, they are driven by a pathological womb envy to mimic that creation destructively.
Oh, wow.
So the splitting of the atom isn't seen as a scientific breakthrough in physics. It's framed as a terrifying, explosive simulation of maternal creative power, but perverted into a mechanism of death.
That is dark. The text actually describes the mushroom cloud as a phallic shadow eclipsing the nurturing sun.
The author is using this extreme rhetoric to show a mechanical process. Once you accept the foundational premise that masculinity is inherently evil, you are forced to view every historical milestone, from the first tool to the splitting of the atom, not as human achievement, but as patriarchal violence.
Right, you have to reverse engineer history to fit the conclusion.
Exactly.
And if history is completely rewritten to fit this conclusion, then the tools we use to understand history, language, and logic have to be rewritten too.
Right.
Which brings us to the concept of semiotic subjugation. This is where the author argues that language and logic have been weaponized to create an inescapable trap for men.
Riker lays this out so brilliantly through what the persona calls the master syllogism of patriarchal entanglement.
I want to lay this out really clearly for you listening, because this is the core logic trap the book exposes.
Go for it.
It goes like this. Premise A states that all men are biological products of the patriarchy. Premise B dictates that the patriarchy is an omnipresent, suffocating, oppressive force.
Right.
Therefore, the undeniable conclusion is that whatever a man says, does, or thinks is inherently oppressive.
The trap is perfectly sealed, because if a man attempts to use reason to debate this conclusion, the persona argues he's merely proving premise A.
By using his patriarchal logic to oppress.
Exactly. The circle is completely unbroken.
This is where we get the example of the iron door that I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. So the scene is set in a university academic corridor.
Right.
A male steps ahead of a female colleague and holds open a heavy iron door for her. He offers a polite smile. To anyone outside this framework, this is just basic manners.
But to the illuminated feminist semiotician, as the persona calls herself, this is a calculated act of patriarchal tyranny.
A polite smile and holding a door.
Yep. The book outlines the double bind perfectly here. If the man holds the door, he is violently asserting his physical dominance. He is forcing her to subordinate her bodily autonomy to his schedule and silently implying she is biologically too weak to operate heavy iron.
But if he lets the door slam shut in her face, he is violently excluding her from spaces of power.
Right.
So he's guilty either way. So I just have to ask, what does this actually mean for basic human communication?
It completely destroys it.
Right. If you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, how does anything get done? The book satirically claims that logic itself is a biological weapon forged in the testicles of the patriarchy.
Such a wild phrase.
If logic is off the table, how can any disagreement be resolved without it just becoming a battle of who can claim the most emotional damage?
That is the exact mechanism the author is trying to expose. The book argues that in this framework, disagreement cannot be resolved.
It just can't be.
Right. It can only be won by the person claiming victimhood. And to explain how this functions on a societal level, the author introduces a fascinating, highly controversial concept. She calls it the institutionalization of borderline personality disorder.
BPD epistemology.
Exactly.
That is a very heavy technical concept. Walk us through how the author connects a clinical psychiatric disorder to a societal theory of knowledge.
Well, in clinical psychology, borderline personality disorder is characterized by several specific traits. You have extreme emotional swings, black and white thinking, a distorted sense of identity, and a pattern of rapidly idealizing someone and then violently devaluing them, which is often called splitting.
Okay, so a very specific set of clinical symptoms.
Right. And the author is suggesting that these specific pathologies have been elevated to a societal operating system.
Wow. It's like playing a game in a rigged casino where
Yeah.
the house doesn't just have an edge, the house changes the rules of the game depending on how they feel that day.
That is a perfect analogy.
And if they feel they lost a hand, the rules are rewritten retroactively to prove they actually won and you cheated.
That's exactly it. The text argues that objective science, things like empirical data, hard evidence, and Karl Popper's concept of falsifiability have been completely discarded in favor of this emotional casino.
Let's touch on Karl Popper for a second because the book specifically mentions him. And this is crucial for understanding how truth is determined in this framework.
Yeah, it's foundational.
Falsifiability is the idea that for a claim to be scientifically valid, it must be possible to prove it false.
Right.
Like, if I say all swans are white, you can prove me wrong by finding a single black swan.
It is the absolute bedrock of the scientific method. If a theory cannot be tested and potentially proven false, it isn't science, it's just dogma.
Right.
But the persona in the book calls falsifiability a weapon of white supremacist logic.
Wow.
She argues that the claims of the movement, like the existence of invisible, systemic male privilege or microscopic emotional violence, are entirely immune to disproof.
Usually, if something can't be disproved, it's considered a weak argument. Like if I say there is an invisible dragon in my garage, but you can't see it, touch it, or measure its heat, my argument is completely meaningless.
Right, but the persona flips that entirely.
She flips it.
Yeah, she executes a total philosophical inversion. She declares that because these claims are immune to disproof, that is exactly what makes them superior truths.
Superior truth.
Exactly. Truth is no longer an objective metric. Truth is based entirely on lived experience, or what the text calls the German phenomenological word Erlebnis.
Erlebnis.
Right. It is dictated by hysterical coherence. If a claim aligns with the emotional solipsism of the victim, it is fact.
If a woman says she was wronged, it happened. Demanding proof is, in and of itself, undeniable proof of your own misogyny.
It's an impenetrable loop.
That closed-loop logic is terrifying. And if objective truth is completely dismantled in everyday conversation and dating apps, what happens when that exact same logic is applied to the justice system?
Oh, it completely reshapes it.
Let's look at how this ideology physically alters the courtroom and the campus.
This brings us to the systematic dismantling of due process, because this is where the theoretical framework we just discussed becomes applied, real-world policy.
Right. It stops being just theory.
The book points to a very specific historical moment to demonstrate this shift. The 2011 Dear Colleague letter issued by the U.S. Department of Education under Title IX.
And the persona calls the resulting systems shadow tribunals.
The book argues that this federal mandate effectively purged the patriarchal stronghold of the university. It did this by forcing universities to lower the standard of proof required in campus disciplinary hearings regarding sexual misconduct.
Okay, so what did they lower it to?
Instead of the traditional criminal justice standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, universities were threatened with the loss of federal funding unless they adopted the preponderance of the evidence standard.
For those who aren't lawyers, preponderance of the evidence means a mere 50.01% certainty. Just barely more likely than not.
Right.
It's basically a coin flip that lands slightly tilted.
And the persona views this lowering of the standard as a glorious victory. It bypassed the archaic criminal justice system and its tedious obsession with proof.
Tedious obsession with proof.
I know. The text argues this mandate turned university campuses into re-education camps, overseen by Title IX coup coordinators who act as armies of inquisitorial priestesses.
Wow.
Under this framework, a male student trapped in a dorm room with an investigator is already guilty by virtue of his biology, and any attempt to defend himself is just further evidence of his toxicity.
Which leads directly into how the book views high-profile cultural moments. Because the author really doesn't hold back here.
Not at all.
The text specifically unpacks several major cases. The Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court confirmation hearings, the Rolling Stone article about the fraternity at the University of Virginia, the Duke lacrosse case, and Emma Solkovich, who is widely known as the Columbia mattress carrier.
These are all cases where the initial highly publicized accusations against men were later either completely unproven, retracted, or exposed in court as total fabrications. But the satirical persona's reaction to this forensic reality is what's so illuminating about the book's thesis. She doesn't deny that the men might have been innocent.
She actually embraces it. She says, we do not care if those specific men were innocent. In fact, their innocence is exactly what makes them perfect.
Exactly.
How does the persona justify framing the forensic facts of these individual cases as what she calls patriarchal noise.
The author demonstrates how the logic of hysterical coherence overrules empirical facts. The persona calls these hoaxes vital mythological truths.
Mythological truth.
The argument is that the overarching systemic truth that all men are guilty by biology and socialization is a superior truth.
Right, so the actual forensic facts of any individual case are just irrelevant.
Exactly. These men serve as necessary blood sacrifices to the cult of grievance. The accusation itself is the evidence because it highlights the systemic issue regardless of whether the specific event actually occurred.
It's the ultimate ideological trump card. Facts do not matter if the narrative serves the greater good. And if a man tries to defend himself against these accusations using evidence or logic, the book introduces another concept that has been weaponized, which is DARVO.
Right, DARVO. It's an acronym that stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Now, usually in clinical psychology, DARVO is described as a manipulative tactic used by abusers to gaslight their victims.
Right, an abuser does something wrong, denies it, attacks the person confronting them, and claims they are actually the victim.
But the satirical persona in this book reclaims DARVO. She doesn't see it as a toxic trait, she elevates it to a sacred planetary defense mechanism.
It becomes the holy duty of the gynocentric ruling class, according to the text.
Gynocentric ruling class.
Yeah, the logic is that because men are biologically predisposed to violence, women must preemptively accuse them. When a man speaks, he is silencing women. When he is silent, he is conspiring. And the author points back to a real-world sociological framework to show how this operates. The Duluth model, which was developed in 1981.
Let's explain the Duluth model thoroughly, because the book leans heavily on it to make its point.
Sure. So the Duluth model was developed in Duluth, Minnesota in the early 1980s as a framework for treating domestic violence.
Right.
Its foundational premise is that domestic abuse is not caused by psychological issues, substance abuse, or behavioral problems.
Oh, what do they claim causes it?
Instead, it posits that all male violence against women is strictly a result of patriarchal socialization. It assumes male power and control are the sole exclusive causes of interpersonal discord.
Okay, so it maps the macro-level theory of patriarchy directly onto the micro-level of a couple arguing in their kitchen.
Precisely. And the book argues that this model successfully renders any male defense as an act of secondary aggression.
Secondary aggression.
Yeah, so if you are a man accused of abuse under the Duluth framework and you deny the accusation, your denial is categorized not as a defense, but as proof of your abusive need for control.
But wait, if the very act of a verbal defense is considered evidence of abuse, then the only way to be innocent is to agree you're guilty.
Well, the persona's trap is that you cannot be innocent. Innocence is a myth.
Wow.
The text states he cannot speak because his breath is violence.
His breath is violence. That is a stark, absolute summation of how the book views the institutional capture of due process.
It really is.
And, if they've captured the campus and the courts, it only makes sense they would target the most fundamental institution of all.
Right, the family.
Exactly. This moves us from the courts directly into the home. The book transitions from psychological and legal arguments to profound economic and sociological ones, centering on the dismantling of the family and what the text calls infinite welfare colonialism.
This section centers on the deliberate exorcism of the father figure from the domestic sphere. The book demands that the reader bow before the year 1969.
1969. Why that year specifically?
That was the year California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act, which ushered in no-fault divorce in the United States.
Oh, and the persona calls Reagan a patriarchal puppet who accidentally served the goddess.
Such a funny way to put it. The satirical argument here is that modern marriage is no longer a sacred bond, a lifelong partnership, or a stable environment for raising children.
Right.
The persona views marriage strictly as a feminist tool, a temporary resource extraction mechanism.
Resource extraction. So basically, a financial transaction.
Exactly. It's designed to expire the exact moment the male utility curve flattens.
The male utility curve.
Yeah. The author argues that in this ideological framework, the husband is viewed merely as an incubator of female independence. Once the woman's lifestyle is permanently secured via alimony, child support, or the division of assets, the man transforms from a utility into a liability and he is discarded.
So the traditional nuclear family is described by the persona as a patriarchal death cult.
Right.
By erasing the father from the home, the movement creates atomized, state-dependent consumer classes that are loyal only to the hive mind rather than to a family unit.
Exactly. They want reliance on the state, not a patriarch.
And the economic asymmetry of this becomes staggering when you look at how the book frames reproduction. Let's talk about what the text calls the holy sacrament of abortion.
The persona contrasts two major Supreme Court decisions to illustrate this: Roe v. Wade in 1973 and the Dobbs decision in 2022.
Okay.
Roe is framed as the true genesis of modern spiritual liberation, while Dobbs is described as a violent, collective psychic assault orchestrated by unevolved male entities.
Unevolved male entities.
Mhm.
The book calls abortion anti-colonial spiritual warfare and literally blood magic.
Blood magic.
Yeah, it's framed as the ultimate rejection of the patriarchal colonization of the womb. But what's fascinating is how the author synthesizes this absolute, uncompromising demand for female bodily autonomy with the unrelenting economic demands placed on men.
This is what the book calls reproductive asymmetry. To prove this point, the author points to real federal mandates, like Title 4D of the Social Security Act and the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act.
We need to explain what those actually are for you listening to understand the joke or really the horror of the satire here.
Right. Title HAVI-D was enacted in 1975, and it essentially federalized child support enforcement. It created a massive bureaucracy that incentivizes states to collect child support by matching the funds they spend on enforcement.
Okay, so the state gets paid to collect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act, or UFSA, ensures that these support orders can be aggressively enforced across state lines.
So you can just move away.
Exactly. The persona gloats over the sheer brilliance of this gynocentric legal warfare.
The core asymmetry the author highlights is this. Under the current cultural and legal paradigm, a woman has 100% unilateral choice over reproduction.
Total control.
Right. She can choose to terminate a life or carry it to term without a single whisper of male input. The man has absolutely zero say. But T, if she chooses to keep the child, she possesses the unquestionable right, backed by the federal government via Title 40D, to extract 18 years of financial slavery from the man.
He has zero reproductive rights, but 100% of the financial responsibility.
It's a huge contradiction.
And the persona describes turning the family court system into a state-sponsored collection agency, hunting down fathers across state lines while women sit on the throne of unilateral choice.
It sounds like the book is describing a societal model where the state effectively steps in as a giant bureaucratic husband.
That's a great way to put it.
The biological father is culturally and physically exiled from the home, but his wallet is kept around via the threat of state violence. The book calls this infinite welfare colonialism. It is tax enslavement.
And to ensure that the biological father remains exiled and that society accepts this new normal, the culture must actively weaponize the children against him.
Weaponize the children. How do they do that?
The author points to media conditioning to show how this is done over decades. The text references everything from Homer Simpson to the dads in shows like Modern Family.
Oh, the bumbling dad trope. The book calls this laugh track hypnosis.
The argument is that this isn't just lazy sitcom writing, it is targeted mimetic warfare. Children are scripted to effortlessly outsmart, patronize, and disrespect their fathers. It's a deliberate inversion of the natural order designed to train the next generation to view male domestic competence as an evolutionary oxymoron.
So a father trying to braid his daughter's hair or cook a meal isn't seen as a man trying his best to care for his family.
Right, he is portrayed as a clumsy perpetrator of the patriarchy, awkwardly invading a sacred female domain.
Just totally incompetent. And the book also cites real-world policies to show how the state attempts to usurp the father's role entirely. It mentions the Scottish named person scheme of 2014 and the U.S. Bradley Amendment of 1986. Let's unpack those.
The Scottish named person scheme was a highly controversial piece of legislation that aimed to assign a state guardian, usually a health visitor or teacher, to every single child in Scotland from birth to age 18.
Wait, to every single child?
Yes, every child.
Yeah.
This state employee would have the power to monitor the child's well-being and share data about the family across government agencies, effectively bypassing the parents entirely.
That's insane. And the Bradley Amendment in the U.S.?
Enacted in 1986, the Bradley Amendment prevents the retroactive reduction of child support debts, even if the father loses his job, becomes disabled, or goes to prison.
So no matter what happens, you still owe it.
The debt accrues endlessly and cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. The persona views both of these policies as glorious tools for ensuring the government seizes control of child development, funded eternally by the subjugated men.
So the children are raised not as independent thinkers guided by a mother and father, but as, what does she say, loyal, traumatized foot soldiers in the cult of grievance.
Exactly.
So from the courts to the home, the book finally takes us to the macro level. How does this cult of grievance operate on a global scale?
Right, she goes big here.
Riker moves from the family unit to global geopolitics, introducing a concept called suicidal empathy.
This is where all the psychological and sociological threads tie into a grand geopolitical strategy. The author starts with a concept from evolutionary psychology called suicidal empathy. In evolutionary terms, empathy is usually an adaptive trait, right? It helps the tribe survive by encouraging members to care for their own, share resources, and protect the vulnerable.
But suicidal empathy is a maladaptive malfunction.
Exactly. It occurs when a population's compassion becomes so unbounded and pathological that it is weaponized against its own survival interests.
Oh, wow.
It is empathy that invites destruction, prioritizing the needs of an outgroup over the survival of the in-group.
And the author's persona champions this suicidal empathy as the highest civic virtue. She demands open borders and fully embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI frameworks across all institutions.
Right, but the chilling part is that she doesn't do this out of genuine compassion for immigrants or marginalized groups.
Not at all.
According to the book, the explicit goal is to use DEI and open borders as demographic weapons. The persona wants to attract third world populations who she believes are already accustomed to systemic subjugation and authoritarian rule and lure them with promises of free subsistence.
Subsidized entirely by the male taxpayers, of course.
Of course.
Welfare for the world, funded by the patriarchy.
The strategy is to flood the zone. By importing vast numbers of people, the movement aims to dilute the political, cultural, and voting power of the native male population until they are completely overwhelmed.
Okay, so replacing the voters.
Right. The imported populations become a permanent, state-dependent consumer class that will dutifully serve the matriarchal technocracy in exchange for resources without ever questioning the agenda.
The book claims the ultimate target here is the complete erosion of Western Enlightenment values.
At the foundation of Western society.
Yeah, things like logic, individual rights, objective truth, the scientific method, and free speech. The persona explicitly states she wants to replace the oppressive scientific method with things like standpoint theory.
And standpoint theory is crucial here.
Let's explain that.
It was developed by feminist theorists like Sandra Harding in the 1980s, and it argues that authority is rooted in individuals' knowledge and the power that such authority exerts. Crucially, it claims that marginalized groups have a more objective view of reality than privileged groups.
So truth isn't found through a microscope or a double-blind study. Truth is entirely subjective and dictated solely by whoever holds the most oppressed status.
Exactly. But to achieve this massive global subversion of Western values, the movement can't just broadcast these radical intentions openly to the masses.
They would be rejected immediately.
Right. So they have to use camouflage. The book calls this the platitude fog.
The platitude fog. Which brings us to a vital rhetorical concept that the author uses to explain how radical ideas become mainstream. And it's called the Motte-Bailey fallacy.
This is a big one.
Let's break down how the book says this works. Because once you understand the Motte-Bailey, you see it everywhere. In the news, in political debates, everywhere.
So the Motte-Bailey is a logical fallacy named after a medieval castle design. The moat is the heavily fortified safe tower situated on a steep hill. It is easy to defend, but not very pleasant to live in. The bailey is the expansive, fertile land below the hill where the actual living, farming, and exertion of control happens.
So it's desirable, but hard to defend.
Exactly. So how does this map onto an argument?
Right. How do you use that in a debate?
In a debate, the arguer advances a highly radical, controversial claim that's the bailey. They want to occupy that radical space.
Like, for example, the claim that all men are biochemically predisposed to rape, the nuclear family must be abolished, and men must be stripped of their constitutional rights.
A massive, highly vulnerable, radical claim. But the moment they are challenged by a logical adversary or public pushback, the arguer immediately retreats to the moat.
The safe tower.
Right, a highly defensible, seemingly benign platitude that no reasonable person could possibly disagree with.
Like saying, we just want equality. We just want women to feel safe walking home at night. And we want men to be freed from toxic expectations so they can take care of their mental health.
Exactly. Who could argue against women's safety and men's mental health?
No one.
But once the critic backs down, appeased by this faux compassion and unable to attack the moat, the arguer immediately marches back out into the bailey to continue implementing their radical agenda.
Wow. And the text provides a startling example of this doublespeak. The persona states, male health is irrelevant. Dismantling the patriarchy requires the total psychological collapse of the male subject.
It's chilling.
They use the benign language of diversity, inclusion, and mental health strictly as a semantic shield. It is a camouflage designed to exclude the male subject entirely while sounding virtuous.
It is a deliberate, calculated inversion of reality. The book refers to this repeatedly as the satanic inversion.
The satanic inversion.
And it's not just applied to logic, borders, and language. The book argues it applies to morality and aesthetics as well.
The aesthetic inversion is particularly striking, and you can really observe it in modern media today.
Oh, absolutely. The persona celebrates the glorification of morbid dysfunction. She claims that classical beauty, physical fitness, biological health, and bodily order are nothing but fascist, colonial tools of rape culture designed to subjugate the liberated female form.
Fascist colonial tools. Therefore, the logical conclusion is that ugliness, obesity, and deliberate physical decay must be elevated as the highest moral virtues.
Up is down, weakness is strength.
True equality is redefined as absolute, unquestionable female supremacy.
Right. The author outlines a system where if a woman says the sky is green, the state must mandate agreement under penalty of excommunication from society.
The sheer scale of the ideological subversion the author outlines is just staggering. It touches every single facet of human existence, from the hand axe to the atom bomb, from the infant's crib to the Supreme Court.
It really is a comprehensive worldview, as twisted as it is.
And this brings us to the epilogue, the final moments of the book where the author, Connie Riker, executes a brilliant narrative shift.
This is my favorite part of the book.
We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing the extreme rhetoric of this radical female supremacist persona. And as a reader, it would be very comforting to just dismiss it all as over-the-top hyperbole, like a clever but exaggerated piece of dystopian fiction.
But in the epilogue, Riker steps out of the caricature, the mask completely drops.
She turns off the synthetic rage, looks the reader directly in the eye, and delivers her ultimate thesis. She says, "You just heard the exact, unfiltered psychological machinery of the cult of grievance."
So she's saying it's not a joke.
Right. The author's arguing that the extremism we just explored isn't a parody of what might happen in some distant dystopian future. It is the unvarnished reality of how the modern cultural landscape is currently operating beneath the surface right now.
Today.
Yes. The book is meant to be a warning to those who still possess the capacity to see it.
And if you connect this back to the bigger picture we've been discussing, this raises a really important question. And it's a profound, rather disturbing one for you, the listener, to consider.
What's the question?
Well, throughout this text, we've seen the mechanics of epistemic closure.
Epistemic closure being the idea that a belief system is completely sealed off from outside logic.
Yeah.
A closed loop where any evidence that contradicts a victim's narrative is automatically classified as an act of further abuse, thereby confirming the original narrative.
Exactly. So the question is this. If a society truly adopts this framework where objective logic is deemed patriarchal violence, where the scientific method is replaced by standpoint theory, and where non-falsifiable emotional claims are the supreme law of the land, how does a culture ever course correct?
Wow.
Or is it permanently locked in a cycle of perpetual grievance and retribution, feeding on itself until there is nothing left?
That is a chilling thought to mull over. If the mechanism for resolving disputes, reason, debate, and empirical evidence is totally destroyed, all you have left is power and punishment.
It's a dark place to end up.
And that is exactly why you need to read this primary source for yourself.
Yeah.
Hearing us discuss it is one thing, but experiencing this visceral, controversial satire firsthand is the only way to truly grasp the scale of the psychological machinery that Connie Riker is exposing.
It is a highly challenging read. It will definitely make you uncomfortable, but it is a necessary one for anyone trying to decipher the underlying codes of our current cultural discourse.
Absolutely. So I'm urging you, our listener, go check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Woke Catechism, Creed for the Cult of Grievance by Connie Riker. You will literally not look at a news cycle, a campus protest, or even a dating app the same way again.
And for those who want to follow the author's ongoing analysis of these topics and see how she applies this framework to breaking news, you can find more of her insights by following her at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Just to spell that out, that's conradriker.substack.com. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We've covered an immense amount of ground, from the Paleolithic era to modern family courts. Before you go, please remember one last time to like and subscribe to the show.
It really helps.
It is the fuel that helps us keep delivering these intensive explorations into the most fascinating, complex, and provocative sources out there. We will see you next time.